Good evening, everyone. We are annual conference of Indian Association of Cardiovascular Thoracic Anesthetists, IACTA. And to start this session, we have got a moderator, Dr. Sandeep Mutha, who will be moderating the sessions with chairpersons and speakers. So I request Dr. Mutha to start the session, please.
Good morning. Welcome to the first session of the first virtual IACTA 2021. Hope you are in a good health and coping with the pandemic well. The first session is on updates of cardiac anesthesia, and the chairpersons are Dr. Benjamin Ninan from Madras Medical Mission, Chennai, Dr. Anil Sant, Director of Pune Anesthesia and Critical Private Limited, Dr. Neeti Makhija, Professor in the Department of Anesthesia, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and Dr. Hemant Vaikar of Navaloka. I would request the first chairperson, Dr. Benjamin Ninan, to introduce the first speaker.
The first speaker for this session is Dr. Vijay Shetty. He is from the Fortis Hospital, Mulund, Mumbai, and his topic for this session is anesthesia for vascular surgery, an update. Over to you, Dr. Anil, to introduce the second speaker.
Our second speaker is Dr. Vinay Kulkarni. He is from Nagpur. He is a consultant intensivist of Vidarbha Anesthesia and Cardiac Care Associates, Nagpur. He has got more than 20 years of experience, and importantly, he is intensivist. Now I request Dr. Neeti Makhija to introduce a third speaker.
It's a matter of pride to introduce Dr. Virinder Kumar Arya. He is Professor, Department of Anesthesiology, Perioperative and Pain Medicine, Max Reddy College of Medicine, University of Manitoba, Winnipeg, Canada. And he has a rich experience of more than 20 years in cardiac anesthesia and has numerous international and national publications to his credit, as well as he has a keen interest in perioperative emotional intelligence and enhanced recovery in cardiac surgery. And he's a recipient of YK Poon Teacher Award 2020, University of Manitoba. And he has got various accreditations to his credit. It's a long list, so time does not permit. I will just say that he is going to talk on surprises despite sureties, MSAC in cardiac anesthesia. Over to Dr. Sandeep Mutha.
Okay, this session will have 3 lectures, one by one, and then the question answer session. Delegates can post their question in the chat box. I request the first speaker to start his lecture.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Welcome all to this inaugural session of the IACTACon 2021. I render sincere thanks to the Executive Committee of the IACTACon 2021 and the IACTA for having me here as the opening batsman for this prestigious event. My topic for today is vascular anesthesia and update. I bring you greetings from Team Anesthesia from Fortis Hospital, Mulund, Mumbai. If there were entity as a vascular anesthetist, you would probably be thinking of him as your poor country cousin compared to your elevated status as a cardiac anesthetist. The truth is actually far from that. Based upon the innovations and the interventions and the rapid progress that's happening in the field of vascular surgery, you would probably find your so-called cousin zooming away in such high speed and fine style. Vascular surgery brings with it the increasing number of elderly, sicker, and higher risk patients with associated organ dysfunctions and comorbidities. Needless to say, this is one high risk category of patients that you would have to deal with. And as an anesthetist, we would begin with the workup of the patient for these interventions. And And always remember that complications like stroke, paraplegia, and bleeding are not far behind. And we need to make an effort to make sure that this is properly understood by all concerned. Which anesthesia technique and what monitoring to be used continues to be point of discussion. And we will be very well aware of the impact of endovascular interventions in vascular anesthesia and surgery. Can we monitor the brain better has been the buzzword in cardiac surgery and vascular anesthesia. We have tools like EEG, transcranial Doppler, and of late, evoked potentials like sensory, motor, and and the brainstem auditory evoked potentials have a great role to play in monitoring and preserving the brain function. We use this extensively in spine and other surgeries, but the time has come for to implement this in the proper monitoring of the brain function and for its preservation as well. Stump pressure, which is the pressure above the carotid clamp in the cases of carotid endarterectomy, need to be maintained in the high 50s or 60s. And if the pressure were not maintained as such above the clamp till at least these levels, it's an indication that the patient would have a neuro event unless a shunt were to be inserted. The near infrared spectroscopy, the NIRS, we are already well aware of, so we won't spend any time there. Just having a monitor is not going to serve any purpose unless we have clearly defined guidelines as to what is my cutoff going to be for me to intervene. For example, in the NIRS, a 20% fall has a 83% sensitivity of a neuro event. And similarly, the TCD percentage has got 100% sensitivity. Some pressure of less than 40 has 100% sensitivity for predicting a neuro event, and therefore the indication for a shunt. Similarly, Moritz in his recent study has looked at the various protocols and has shown that routine shunting, that means if you're working in a team where the shunt is going to be put irrespective of what the monitor says or whatever the current thinking is, has a perioperative stroke rate of 1.4%, though the perioperative stroke and death rate is a bit high. This is preceded only or superseded only by the selective shunting guided by AVIC testing. That means if you do surgery in an AVIC patient, probably it is only lower. Whereas in comparison, selective shunting, which is guided by transcranial Doppler, has a comparatively higher perioperative stroke risk. So shunting has its advantages. Having it guided or having it routinely placed probably saves you a perioperative stroke risk. Similarly, this study has shown that they looked at the early outcomes after a routine delayed shunting, in which they open up the carotid for these patients and then they do a endarterectomy or the initial part of the endarterectomy and dissection, and then place this Prurit Sinara shunt where the one part of the shunt goes to the distal carotid and then the proximal carotid, and it has a T which is built into that, which not only helps to wash away some debris but also indicates that the flow continues to be pulsatile. Preservation spinal cord, is anybody dealing with the spinal cord aware that anything that occupies this part of the spinal cord is going to be a very high risk of, especially the thoracoabdominal type B, type 2 aneurysms, which are the highest risk for having a poor spinal cord outcome and paraplegias. It supplies spinal cord supply the anterior and posterior spinal arteries, and they are receiving repeated or interval based replenishments through the radicular arteries, which are basically from the vertebral, so the subclavian, and this is the radicular artery that is the biggest artery, which is usually sought out even sometimes angiographically preoperatively by the surgeons, so that they can successfully re-implanted, thereby preventing ischemia to the cord. And we are becoming more and more advanced and adventurous, and this is one of the renal aneurysm which has been stunted, not only stented and kept open, but there is funnels which are going to be perfusing the individual celiacs and the mesenterics as well. This is one of the devices which are used to monitor the pressure as well as enable the drainage of the CSF, because avoiding the increase in CSF pressure is one of the important goals that can be had, and having a intra CSF drain which is going to be allowing the overflow if the CSF pressure were to go above, say, 10 centimeters of mercury or 13 or 12 centimeters of water, would be helpful in preventing in preserving the spinal cord. At the same time, Other things like maintaining a good mean systemic heart pressure above 65 to 70, having a low CVP or venous pressure, encouraging hypothermia, even mild hypothermia is protective, systemic, or even infusing cold saline into the epidural space. The needs of the paraspinal tissue, because the hybridization around the paraspinal tissue is such that even if that were to be showing a good NACE reading, would probably indicate that the underlying spine is also well preserved. That is the extent of the hybridization that happens there. Maintaining HB or hemoglobin remains the cornerstone as always. So this is what the question was asked, that what are your preserving tactics for the 8 experts who are part of this research consortium for endovascular repair surgery of complex aortic aneurysms. In addition to what was described in the previous slide, they had other maneuvers like a steroid bolus, mannitol, and naloxone infusion. Some of them indulge in this. And if the paraparesis were to occur, then addition of CSF drain, if it is not already put, decreasing the target CSF pressure, and as well as increasing the mean arterial pressure and the hemoglobin, along with the imaging of the spinal cord, were their strategies. Major bleeding, vascular surgery and major bleeding go hand in hand. And most of the evidences are from trauma, of course. But what our understanding is that prophylactic antifibrillatory use is recommended in all surgery where major bleeding is anticipated. Many of these patients would be on antithrombotic agents because of the underlying lesions, or on antiplatelet because of their comorbidities, and they always this would be a very high risk factor for them. Blood and FFP and platelets can be administered early in the bleeding. We routinely use point of care coagulation testings for these cases. Fibrinogen concentrates are now freely available and recommended in major bleeding, where too much of plasma cannot be given because of the various side effects. Initially, there was a recommendation of allowing permissive hypotension for these major surgeries and keeping the blood pressure even as low as 50 to 60 systolic for some time in order to avoid washing away of the clots that would have been formed to block the bleeding sites. However, it has now been shown in studies like this improved trial that aggressive permissive hypertension with the systolic BP of less than 70 is actually harmful and may have worse outcomes. What are the type of anesthesia that we should be using? In REVAR, whether this is a meta-analysis of our local regional anesthesia versus GA in the repair of ruptured abdominal aneurysm, where again the endovascular route is taking precedence. And it showed that the REVAR under local anesthesia is associated with the lower 30-day in-hospital mortality, but more they conclude that they would have observational bias and more studies were required. Similarly, this study by Catherine Greco studied the impact of epidural analgesia plus GA on perioperative morbidity for open abdominal surgery. We know the advantage of epidural anesthesia as far as pain control, intestinal function, reducing inflammatory markers, etc. But in this study, did not show that that epidural plus GA had any added advantages, because the post-operative pulmonary, cardiac, or renal complications remained the same irrespective of the EA-GA group, or only when the GA was given. And the transmission rates are also higher in this EA-GA group. We know the advantages for the local anesthesia or regional anesthesia and carotid endarterectomy, and this study tried to look at that. What are the percentage of people who are using local regional anesthesia? They found that in the US, where about 26,000 patients were studied in a 6-year period using the NSQIP data, the patients, only 14% were performed the regional anesthesia, though that in spite of the advantages that patients who are undergoing regional carotid endarterectomy under regional anesthesia were less likely to experience the combined endpoint of stroke, myocardial infarction, and mortality compared to the patients who undergo them in GA. Similarly, in endovascular abdominal aortic repair, again, the type of anesthesia doesn't matter. Michael Cheng showed that local and regional anesthesia is safe and effective for elective EVAR. The take-home message seems to be going for local anesthesia. This would mean that the traditional cardiac anesthetist has to step out of his comfort zone and meet more people who work outside the OT and get to know the tricks and trades of getting these surgeries and the procedure done with a minimalistic way, at the same time ensuring maximum safety. Exciting times lie ahead. A pilot, this is a study where the ERAS protocols have been drawn for aortic surgery, or indulging in age-old spinal anesthesia and studying the outcomes in aortic endograft placement. TCAR is another exciting endeavor where cannula is passed into the carotid artery by open technique, and as you can see here, the blood is sucked into the cannula, and hopefully the debris also, and this has been shunted through this channel into the femoral vein, and there's a coaxial channel through which the stenting can be accomplished. So my advice to my young cardiac anesthesia friends is that probably they need to sacrifice the uniform and probably don one of these radiation suits and emerge as a hero in the cath lab, because certainly I believe that much of the progress of cardiac anesthesia and vascular anesthesia is going to happen in the cath lab, and that place, the cath lab, will deserve and will need a leader and a one person who understands most of the things that are the happenings in the lab. I have a couple of minutes and I'll just spend them in telling you about my thoughts about these kind of platforms. We certainly miss meeting our teachers and our idols, and meeting the students as well. This is pick some pictures from the Goa ActorCon that we had. You can have any number of online meetings, but what you would miss in this meetings are times like these, and this companionship and camaraderie that we build up in these meetings is unparalleled. So we all hope that we'll all see you tomorrow, see you all in the coming year. This is our team welcoming Dr. Kumar and his team from Madurai in the Goa conference, and we hope that we will all see you at Madurai in 2022, and meeting you all would be a real pleasure. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Respected chairpersons, moderators, very good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, I wish to thank Dr. Rajesh Arya and the entire team of ActorCon 2021 for giving me this excellent opportunity to share my views on fast tracking and early extubation of cardiac surgery and update. What is fast tracking? I'm sure we all know, but just to recapitulate, fast tracking basically means rapid progress from perioperative preparation through surgery and discharge from the hospital. It's a highly individualized amongst various centers. It involves team activity. Every team member is actively, directly or indirectly involved in having successful fast track program. The basic components of fast track program are fast track cardiac anesthesia, which involves choice and titration of short-acting anesthesia drugs, standardized surgical procedures. Early extubation is definitely one of the most pivotal things of fast track cardiac surgical program. Temperature management, avoidance of sustained postoperative hypothermia, a good pain management program, early ambulation, early alimentation, and a safe discharge. And all these have to be done without increasing complications. So this is the challenge of a fast track surgical program. Why are they needed? These fast track programs, they are needed because now we definitely are seeing more and more number of cardiac surgical procedures. There is an increasing population of elderly patients coming up for surgery, and all this definitely involves a lot of cost of care. And there has been evolution of surgical techniques in the last couple of decades. From most of the coronary artery bypass surgery is being done from on pump to off pump techniques now, and to match with these developments in surgical things, we need to come up with programs so as to facilitate early recovery from the patient from the surgery. Also, we have to look at minimizing the post-operative risk, perioperative risk, which were there with conventional management techniques such as elective post-operative ventilation, sedation, pain, and most patients would have some amount of psychological or cognitive dysfunction because of exposure to sedation and mechanical ventilation. The fast track cardiac program pathways have evolved from the early 1990s. Initially, the time of fast track would be at somewhere around 10 hours for early extubation after surgery, because most of the patients were intubated for almost 12 to 18 hours selectively 2 decades earlier. But now, with more and more improvements in technique and skills everywhere, We are looking at early extubation, the period somewhere between 1 to 4 hours or up to 6 hours after surgery. And now most of us are practicing ultra fast track techniques or immediate extubation in the operating room. Many studies have looked at the safety and efficacy of fast track programs along with any associated morbidity, mortality. And most of them, even though they have been observational studies and more of them being retrospective, very few of them being prospective randomized trials, but essentially they all have said about safety of fast track program pathways, and also mentioned about early hospital discharge, early ICU discharge, and reduction in the cost of care. Cochrane database of systematic reviews, the latest update in 2016 was done on fast track cardiac care for adult cardiac surgical patients. They looked at two key components of fast track care. One is the low dose opioid versus high dose opioid based general anesthesia, and the second was the time-based management of extubation after cardiac surgery. When they looked at all the primary and secondary outcomes, primary outcome being mortality and secondary outcomes being postoperative myocardial infarction, strokes, reintubations. So there was no statistical significant difference amongst the two groups. Obviously, the time to extubation and length of intensive care unit stay and hospital stay was lesser in the patients who were subjected to low dose opioid techniques. Similarly, in the fast track, in the time to extubation for fast track surgical patients, again, there was no difference in mortality and postoperative morbidity key points. And there was shorter time to extubation and lesser intensive care unit stay and hospital stay in the early extubation patients. A retrospective cohort study about 1,500 odd patients looked at analysis of different variables in patients who were extubated in the operating room and patients who got extubated in the ICU postoperatively. They looked at, and in their conclusions, they came up with a statement that a higher probability of extubations was possible in the operating room in patients who were younger, with lower body mass index, higher albumin, absence of lung disease and diabetes, lesser invasive surgery, isolated CABG, and lower fentanyl doses. What are the benefits of a fast track program? There are benefits to the patient, benefits to the team as such, and benefits in terms of cost. Looking at benefits to the patient, there is definitely early resumption of normalcy in terms of ability to communicate about discomfort and pain, ability to start oral intake. This is a major source of concern for most patients in the postoperative period. So obviously this is better with a fast track program in place. Hemodynamics, we all understand the effects of ventilation on preload. So in a patient who is spontaneously breathing and not on a ventilator, the preload will be optimal and the effect on cardiac output will be definitely optimized. And this will mean that obviously we'll have lesser requirement of inotropes and vasodilators to manage the patient. A spontaneously breathing patient, extubated patient will obviously breathe properly if the analgesics are managed properly. They will mobilize themselves in bed and they'll cooperate early with physiotherapy, and this will mean better respiratory care, better respiratory outcomes. An extubated patient obviously can have a better interaction with the family, and it is a source of satisfaction both for the patient as well as the family. And once patient goes through all these fast key components, there is an opportunity for early ambulation and early discharge. The team obviously, once we perform to the requirements of fast track technique, we understand and enjoy the benefits of good communication and good standard of care. Much has been discussed in the literature about the cost benefits of fast tracking, and it is obvious that because of reduced ICU and hospital stay, obviously the costs are going to go down. In terms of the micro components of care, such as endotracheal suction, sedation, supports of hemodynamic medications and ventilatory support. So all these would mean a extubated patient obviously would need very few of these and hence the cost of care will go down. In terms of human resources, an extubated patient would obviously can be subjected to 1:2 nursing care, whereas an intubated patient would need 1:1 care in most places. So that would mean we can manage with proper optimized human resources, and eventually this will all lead to a better turnover of patients in the ICU. So we all currently the status is these fast track cardiac pathways are safe because there is no additional increase in morbidity mortality because of these pathways. Key components, as we all discussed just now, is about good team dynamics, good anesthesia management, very protocolized temperature management in the operating room, and hemodynamic care. But the most important is optimum surgical correction or optimum surgical time. Both are equally important, the correction as well as time. Because unless we have a good surgical result, we are not looking at a good outcome. So having a good surgical correction of the technique or a good revascularization in the bypass operation would be a key component of this care. And the length of surgical time, it has to be limited. It's difficult to subject a patient for early extubation within the OR if the surgery has gone longer and the patient has become hypothermic and unstable. How to manage a fast track anesthesia in the operating room? Choice of anesthesia technique has to be a very balanced one. Fentanyl doses can be limited to 10 to 15 mics per kg. Now many centers do have the benefit of access to remifentanil and use those for optimizing, managing extubations in the OR. We can choose the muscle relaxants now, cisatracurium, atracurium, or vecuronium as per our choice, and manage extubation in the OR or early the postoperative period. Additional analgesics have to be planned and according to the patient's hemodynamics and creatinine and their safety. Most patients, I mean, it will be great to have a depth of anesthesia monitor for managing extubations in the OR in addition to the other monitors. Before, when we really plan extubation in the OR, the inhalation agents usually need to be turned off for about 15-20 minutes. The muscle relaxant, if used in infusions, have to be turned off, say about 30 minutes before the skin closure. And the last, if we are using intermittent dosage, the last dose of the relaxant should be somewhere around more than 30 minutes before the skin closure. Adequate analgesia has to be ensured at all times, so especially at the time of extubation, and we need to be ready with administering some top-up analgesics if required after extubation. After adequate reversal of neuromuscular blockade and the proper control of hemodynamics, assessment has to be done in the OR for feasibility of on-table extubation, the quality of breathing, the tidal ventilation, respiratory rate, urine output. All this would go in towards extubating the patient in the OR. It would take about 10 to 15 minutes more after the skin closure to manage the patient in the OR for extubation. All this requires continued presence of the anesthesiologist to ensure safety and to troubleshoot if any issues arise. Also, we need to be ready. The team has to be very prepared for any possible adverse situations, which would mean doing a reintubation or if there is a excessive bleeding or drainage from the mediastinal tubes, opening the chest again in the operating room. So these are very rare, but the team needs to be ready for that. It needs at most very close collaboration between the surgeon, with the surgeon in off-pump surgery, and with the perfusionist in non-pump surgery to ensure that we are able to achieve fast track or early OT extubations. Many centers have a protocolized way of analgesic approach in these patients. For example, either a thoracic epidural or paravertebral blocks. But all these things have to be done in a very protocolized manner to ensure that the blocks are done very safely without any side effects. And most centers would now have immediate extubation as a part of their program. and it is easier implemented in the centers run by anesthesiologists, in the ICUs run by anesthesiologists. Patient selection for fast track pathways, age more than 70, patients on preoperatively mechanical ventilation, patients having intra-aortic balloon pump, or patients with renal failure. All these are not good candidates for fast tracking. Intraoperative factors, increased surgical time or a complex surgical procedure, presence of unstable hemodynamics and improper gas exchange, presence of arrhythmias, all would not be a good thing for fast track cardiac surgery. Most important is to have the team comfort about patient safety at the end of the procedure to make sure that the fast track is done in this patient or not. So there has to be some discussion or some kind of understanding amongst the team that yes, this patient is for fast tracking, everything is good. So to summarize, fast track cardiac surgery is beneficial. This is important to define the standard of care and team dynamics. It's a great opportunity to optimize care, especially in all the branches of care, in all the aspects of care, like surgery, anesthesia, perfusion, resources, and costs. So if we enter into a fast track pathways, definitely there's a chance to optimize every aspect of this. Fast track cardiac anesthesia is extremely pivotal for the success of fast track cardiac pathways. I thank you all for your patient listening.
So dear friend, MSORG in the perioperative medicine is a new concept, new emerging concept, which means surprise anticipation and recognition capability. So before there was a stress on mastering the techniques and the skills, and subsequently it was realized that we have to master the non-technical skills as well as about the emotional intelligence also while acquiring the skills. And that brought the simulation exercises into the training modules. And now it has been recognized that despite this, some of the events are not prevented. And they are primarily because of the surprising situations arising in the medicine. So this is the first paper which talks about this medical surprise anticipation and recognition capability, which is a new concept, and it can be developed by the training modules. So there are two types when we encounter the unanticipated situations. One is called surprise, which is an emotion arising from a mismatch between an expectation and what is actually observed or experienced. The other is called novelty, which refer to an emotion arising from a situation that never been previously experienced or encountered. In surprise, time is a crucial factor, and rapidity of the event determines the intensity of the surprise. Surprises and novelty can be positive and negative, and both can lead the people to learn from their mistakes. Novelty and surprise, they play important role in any team or individual to develop the future skills and future behavior changes. Negative surprises lead to more of the curiosity and more of the knowledge-seeking behavior to improve upon self. Negative surprises have high potential for stunning and leading to the fixation errors and to the catastrophe. So why the surprises occur in medicine? The reason is because our mind only recognizes the pattern. External world is infinite and continuously changes, and the ability of our brain to analyze has a limitation for increasing complexity. All possibilities cannot be perfectly anticipated by the pattern recognizing mind, and mental abilities are affected by emotion, attitude, and environment. Most importantly, despite knowing that these are the limitations of our mind, when it comes to the practical situations and implementation, our mind does not know its limitation, and it leads to the deterministic predictions and expectations based upon our training and the knowledge and previous experiences. And when these expectations fail, we are surprised. So why surprises occur more in emergency and perioperative medicine? Because bigger teams are involved and many events occur in a very rapid fashion. In normality also, the medicine and healthcare are continuously changing based upon the science, technology, and regulation. This very process of change also creates pathways for surprise and leaves us vulnerable to its impact. So this MSAR concept, which is basically medical surprise anticipation and recognition capability, is introduced to develop the process for addressing surprising events and protecting the patients and teams from harmful impact. So let us first understand the surprise behavior and response before we attempt to develop a module. Whenever surprise occur, depending upon the intensity of the surprise, the first response is stunning response, where we are not able to understand what has happened and we become totally mute to any response. After some time, depending upon our experience, there is a startle response, which is based upon our previous experiences and the training, and usually lead to a fixation error, people repeating same behavior in the surprise and loss of the situational awareness, which finally lead to the catastrophe. Now the study has shown that during this startle response, if we train the people to respond to the surprise, then actually they can reorient their attention and they can give a measured response and catastrophe can be prevented. Next, we should understand the surprise occurrence pattern. This is a very famous Dunning-Kruger effect, for which the Nobel Prize was given in psychology in 2000. So this graph tells how a novice person, when he is trained, he develops the confidence and how he becomes more and more expert. Initially, when he is able to do certain number of procedures, he becomes confident but little ignorant, and then he had some catastrophe and his confidence shattered. That is called valley of despair. But repeated training modules again and again doing the same skill, his confidence goes slowly again starts building. He again fails, but with more failures, he becomes gradually more wise and he starts anticipating certain problems. This is called slope of entitlement. Now, the pattern of surprises is totally inverse to this graph. Initially, the incidence of surprises is more, and as the learning improves, the incidence of surprises keeps going down, but it never becomes zero. So in cardiac anesthesia, we need to develop the modules to deal with the surprises. And for that, first thing is to recognize the situation and procedures that often give surprise, like vascular cannulations, circulatory support devices, or in ICU, primarily the cardiogenic shocks. To develop strategies that establish resilience in team as well as in individual is very important to confront the surprise. We should improve the capabilities to coordinate in a timely and effective way to unimagined circumstances. Learning from the previous encounters is very important by generating situational reports as well as red team concept. That means training the people to think of unthinkable. Now I'm just trying to describe a simple module which we have developed for training the residents or any person who is doing the vascular cannulations in Seldinger technique and use of ultrasound imaging. So in the first step, we tell or train the people in basically making them aware that the use of tissue dilator over guide wire is the most dangerous step, one has to be very cautious before doing this dilatation. Second, the cornerstone of this Seldinger technique is accurate placement of intravascular cannula, which is traditionally taught that the free flow of the aspirated blood and free fall of the guide wire through the cannula into the vessel lumen is the end point. At the same time, when the people use the same endpoint for the ultrasound guided cannulations, we tell them that this endpoint has the limitation. Looking for the blood flow has the limitation. For example, your blood might be rising, but it might be coming from a hematoma which has developed in a hypertensive patient from the artery because of the first hit. Or despite blood rising column, they may not be able to thread the guide wire because their guide wire is hitting against some adenoma inside the vessel. So we insist that they should scan their vessel continuously for greater depth and the length of the vessel. The second thing, we train the people that there is a fixation error because we move from the Seldinger to the ultrasound technique. So the tendency is to not look for the needle tip and the needle shaft, but to look for the tissue movement. We train them in identifying the needle tip and the shaft by the various reverberation patterns and insist that all the time they should look for the needle tip and not recognize the needle position by the tissue movements. Third, we insist about the anatomical landmark and to choose the puncture size wisely, like in subclavian punctures, we tell them not to go more medially. Similarly, for vascular cannulation of femoral artery for ECMO or similar devices, we tell them that they should go above the origin of the profunda artery and they should identify the profunda artery before hitting the femoral artery. Next, we train our people that it's not necessary to hold the or use the syringe always with the needle. They can even cannulate the vessel IJV just thinking that it is a big vein. But the most important step is that they should always see the tip of the needle, see the indentation of the vessel wall, and then give a stab and always look for the tip of the needle and center it in the center of the vessel before doing the next step of the cannulation. And next step, we make them aware about the guide wire construct and behavior and tell them certain simple tricks to straighten the tip of the guide wire and the utility of straightening these tips for vascular cannulations and in negotiation the various intricacies of the vessel positions. We insist upon checking the guide wire by TE or subcostal ultrasound for the J tip, and we always tell them to recognize this guide wire when other wires are present in the vascular system by radiographically or by ultrasound. Then we make them aware about the dilator problems. The dilator can be shared while puncturing the skin if their stab is not good enough, as well as we tell them the possible sites of dilator injuries if they are going from the right side or left side, or if they are entering from femoral veins, what are the anatomical positions where they can hit the vein if they overdo with the dilator. At the same time, we tell them certain warning signs if the trajectory of the dilator is not along with the guide wire, and we tell them that if the guide wire starts moving with the dilator, that's not a good sign. As well as we ask them never to dilate the vessel if they are planning a small cannulations. And we insist now for the endpoint of the visual confirmation of the needle and guide wire inside the intended vessel, and not only rely on the free flow of the blood. At the same time, we insist upon scanning the carotid artery for the atheromas. We train them in certain patterns of the blood flow in the IJV, which tells like SVC syndrome or hyperviscosity syndrome. And if the IJV or some vessel is hyperdynamic, like in IJV, it could be tricuspid stenosis or tricuspid regurgitation. And finally, we make them aware about certain congenital or acquired anomalies. And these 5 anomalies we always tell for any central line cannulations related to the SBC. At the same time, we make them aware that in case of previous cannulation, there could be stenotic vessel or there could be some thrombosis which may obstruct the vessel. We always tell them to look for the congenital abnormalities, and we have a protocol to identify if their catheter goes into the pulmonary vein, or if it goes to the LSBC, or if it goes into the coronary sinus. And for that, an algorithm is there, and we always train our people in that algorithm. And finally, we tell them that whenever in trouble, they should immediately call for the help. And then there is a protocol for the person who is coming to help to think just like a red team concept, not think what the original team is thinking and think differently than the existing team which is doing the procedure there. So to conclude, medical practice has a history of reactive paradigm. In our constant pursuit for safety and quality, we are witnessing a constant shift towards the proactive and psychological measures in the medical training. The concept of medical surprise, anticipation, and response capability is one of the various steps toward this goal, and it is again achievable by training the people with the certain type of modules. Thank you very much.
Hello. It was very nice lectures, 3 lectures. I would like our co-chairperson, Dr. Hemant Vaikar, to summarize the 3 lectures and what he thinks about it. Dr. Vaikar, please. Sir, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I bring greetings from Sri Lanka, a land of serendipity. It's a very time-bound, excellent presentation from all the 3 speakers. Coming to the first topic of vascular anesthesia, Dr. Shetty has emphasized the importance of well-trained cardiac and vascular anesthesiologist, and he is coming out of his comfort zone into the cath lab. So there are 2 points here. One may not be related to anesthesia, but the importance of CT angio 3D reconstruction is very important for the aortic interventions, and also the presence of hybrid cath lab. I think that should be emphasized for the vascular intervention. The second lecture is about fast tracking, which most of us are doing it in any way, which when the definition itself has changed from 10 hours to 4 hours to even on-table extubation. This requires a complete harmony between the teams, and this is possible because of the what we call multimodal analgesia, where most of the time it is blocks are used, the nerve blocks are used, plus use of dexamethasone, use of magnesium, xylocard, paracetamol. All this can help in fast tracking of these patients. Most of the important is there should not be any awareness and pain relief, and that's how the fast tracking will be practiced. The third is very interesting topic of MSARC in cardiac anesthesia by Dr. Arya, and it's a new concept, and it can be summarized in only one slide, which is shown as a graph, and it is beautifully demonstrated the journey of an individual from mount stupid to less stupid to a knowledgeable person over a course of time. And I think that's what summarized the Arya's lecture. And now I hand over to Dr. Sumit to conduct question and answer session and open the panel for discussion. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I request all the chairpersons and speaker to unmute themselves. There are a few questions in the chat box. For one for Dr. Vijay Shetty by Dr. Ashok Bade. which fibrinolytic is preferred and what are the reasons for it? Vijay.
So, that's a great question actually, because we never enjoyed any great evidences, but the recommendations were always robust about giving these agents antiphys. But my short answer would be like we routinely use tranexamic acid, which is proven even cardiac and non-cardiac surgeries with the great efficacy, as well as with minimum side effect. The only thing that we need to warn is that the dose should not be very high dose, because it tend to lead to seizures. And therefore, in my practice, at least I don't use more than 30 to 50 milligram per kg. So that would be one. More than the antifibrinolytic agents, there is also thought process. Actually, there's a very good article in the beginning of last year in the BJA, which has summarized this efficacy in vascular anesthesia. And I think that would be the agent to be used.
There is a combined question to it by Sandeep Gare. What is your antifibrinolytic regime? Actually, what you give?
So,
you give tranexamic acid. Yeah.
Yes. So at one point we used to be using 500 milligram bolus and then around 100 to 200 milligram per hour. But like I said, right now we just don't use more than 4 vials, that is around 2 grams in each patient.
Okay. There can be an open question. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Sandeep, can I say, I conducted a study on thoracic aortic aneurysm, comparing Tranexa and ICA, epsilon aminocaproic acid and tranexamic acid. I found in my study both were equally efficacious in terms of requirement of blood transfusion, bleeding terms, but there was an increased incidence of seizures and with tranexamic acid, and increased incidence of renal injury with epsilon aminocaproic acid. So what as a practice that I do, if patient has a raised serum creatinine levels, I don't give epsilon aminocaproic acid. That is one thing. And I personally prefer ICA.
Thank you, ma'am. There are multiple questions. Blocks which can be given, like subpectoral block, interfacial block, or can you emphasize on it, Dr. Vinay Kulkarni?
Yeah, I couldn't hear the question correctly, but I've gone through the chat box. Basically, there are many blocks which we can practice. Subpectoral blocks, I'm not trained in that, but I'm sure with the current understanding, most of us who are practicing blocks would do it with some kind of guidance, ultrasound guidance, and that would be a safer way to do it. And the paravertebral blocks, pleural blocks. So all these would definitely go hand in hand in kind of making the patient pain-free at the time of extubation. Having a catheter-based technique for prolonged postoperative analgesia would be something we can explore. But all these have to be protocolized at individual centers and ensure that it is conducted very safely. So that is my take on blocks as such.
Any thoughts by Dr. Sant or Dr. Benjamin on this? Yes, sir.
Please go ahead. Benjamin, sir, you please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Now, regarding fast tracking, we have, at least where I work, we have a problem with temperature control. Usually by the end of 4 hours, the patients are really at temperature, even in spite of using fluid warmers and surface blankets. With the air conditioning, which we don't have a really good control on, the temperature of the patient is very often 34, 33. And so we are happy to extubate in the ICU after about 4 hours. And we are comfortable with that. We have no pressure on ICU beds. So that as far as fast tracking. Then the antifibrinolytic, we are very well used to tranexamic acid. We hardly ever use ICA. And our doses are, we actually even use it topical. At the end of surgery, some of surgeons like put it in the 2 grams of tranexamic acid in the pericardial sac before they close the chest. So that is, frankly, there are surgeons who don't like to use it at all, and we we don't see much difference in bleeding in either of the cases. I mean, in routine, I don't know about, I'm not talking about vascular surgery. I'm talking about not cardiac bypass.
Yeah. Dr. Sant, on paravertebral block in this, yeah.
No, I wanted to ask Dr. Vinay Kulkarni a question.
Yes,
When we are using a technique called as fast track, actually, in my opinion, this term is a misnomer nowadays, because with advent of good narcotic, moderate dosage, good relaxant, good inhalants, and good analgesia techniques, NSAID afterwards, everything. So the everything extubation or length of stay is decided by if there is bleeding, if there is arrhythmias, if there is low output state, if there is problem, you require dialysis and etc. So naturally the stay increases. But by default, we do not decide whether we are going to use high narcotic anesthesia or moderate narcotic anesthesia. So fast track term itself needs to be recoined in present days. This is number one. Number two, I wanted to ask, when we are using whatever this fast track technique, there are certain golden standards which are established when we decide about mortality, morbidity, and quality of life. So is there any evidence on clinical outcome in determining benefits or harm of this particular fast track anesthesia? Because what I am trying to tell you, sometimes it is blamed that there is increased incidence of awareness, there is less analgesia in fast tracking, because this, I don't know, is there any long-term study, evidence, hard outcome, has it come? This is my question to Dr. Kulkarni.
Sir, Dr. V.K. Arya wants to answer the question. Over to Dr. V.K. Arya.
Okay.
Can't hear you, Dr. Arya.
Dr. Arya, your voice is not there. No, still we can't hear you. Dr. Vinay Kulkarni, can you answer it?
Yeah, sir, I definitely agree with your first point that this term needs to be recoined. We need to put a better term to it. The second thing is about awareness. Definitely having a bispectral index is a must in these cases. And at our center, we don't have it. But at least if we are subservient to have a end-tidal gas monitor, we would kind of do something in the way of preventing an awareness per se. And that is one thing. Bispectral index is a must, I would think, for these cases. In terms of the third part, having long-term outcomes, basically all the studies which we have gone through during this course of this presentation, I really did not find any long-term studies, outcome studies, like studies about 10-year data or 20-year data. But there have been few studies who have looked at kind of 1-year data, and they've said that there's no difference in the outcomes of cognitive and functional outcomes. So most of the studies have looked at short-term outcomes, and they say that they are comparable. There is no added morbidity, mortality, and this is only at low and moderate risk cardiac surgeries. They have not looked at high risk cardiac surgeries. And obviously, I'm sure most of us would not really attempt going in a fast track technique for high risk cardiac surgeries, because there the safety is kind of more priority. But for all low and moderate risk, I think taking all into account, we can proceed with fast track.
We agree with you on this. Dr. V.K. Arya? Yeah, you are audible. Yes, sir, you are audible. Yes, sir.
Okay. So the place where I work, actually, this is the place which started the fast track, now which is called enhanced cardiac surgical recovery process. In early 80s, and the motivation for that they were not having separate cardiac ICU, so that their surgical anesthesia team started doing the fast tracking in OR extubation early 80s. And now they have developed a very nice protocol. And the key component of this fast track, now it is called Enhanced Cardiac Surgical Recovery Protocol. They are number one. We have shifted from hypothermic bypass to the normothermic bypass. So normothermic means that our bypass, irrespective of the duration, whether it is 4 hours, 6 hours, it usually runs above 35 degrees centigrade. So usually the temperature drift is not less than 35 degrees centigrade. So that has helped a lot in the temperature management of these patients. And we brought this concept to the PGH Chandigarh also. The second thing which they do is actually, this is very amazing. They have the sufentanil actually here. And in sufentanil, they give initial large dose, but after that, they don't give the narcotics. At the time of induction, they will give 1 microgram per kg body weight, but subsequently toward the end of the surgery, depending upon what is the duration of surgery, they will not give any narcotics. Rather, they will shift over to low dose ketamine, just 5 milligram of ketamine, some IV paracetamol, sort of the things. The third thing which they have developed is that we are not using now the blood product as such, but we are using the blood components. For example, if the patient's INR is high, we use octaplex. If it is the fibrinogen deficiency, we just give the fibrinogen concentrate. So this blood component therapy. So basically, if you see in our setup, we hardly use RBCs as such because of the cell saver device, which is used almost in every case. But we use more of the blood component therapy. So that actually prevents a lot of the things by the end of the surgery in terms of the bleeding, as well as in terms of the blood transfusion related inflammatory reaction. And the fourth thing these guys do is that in selective cases, they do the high spinal anesthesia. And that works very well. And regarding blocks, we do practice the block, but here the surgeons are very good. They infiltrate the sternum at the same plane where the blocks are intended. So that also helps in their enhanced recovery protocol. And here the enhanced recovery protocol means that the patient comes for the surgery on the day of surgery in the morning, and he gets discharged from the hospital on the 4th day after the surgery.
Dr. V.K. Arya, there is a last question. Do you subject for TAPVCs for fast track? Anybody can take this question. 5 seconds.
I won't do that. Not in our place. Not in our place.
Okay, we are coming to the
I couldn't understand. What question? I couldn't
TAPVC.
TAPVC. Total anomalous pulmonary venous connection
for fast track.
in children.
Oh, TAPVC.
Yeah,
TAPVC. Yeah. So yes, we have done this in Chandigarh. A few of cases. It depends upon how big is the
Dr. V.K. Arya, we have to close this session now. We have to close this session now because we have to start the second session. I thank all the chairpersons and the speakers who have given a thoughtful input in all the subjects. I declare this session closed, and we can go for the next session. Over to the organizers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice
Thank you.
meeting you.
Thank you.